Welcome to Sewer Mutant, the comic book podcast for weirdos like you. I'm Clint Finley, and I'm joined as usual by my co-host, John Eckelberry.
How's it going, everybody?
Good. And today we have a special guest here to talk with us about ElfQuest. It's my friend Elinore Edge. Elinore is the illustrator of the Cosmic Dancer Oracle, written by Tess Whitehurst and Sedona Soulfire, and many book covers and commissions, as well as several personal projects. She's an artist, an illustrator, a dancer. Welcome to the show, Elinore.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so like I said, we're going to be talking about ElfQuest by Richard and Wendy Pini, but first we like to do a little icebreaker to get us warmed up. So my icebreaker for today is, what is your dream location spot? And it has to be outside the United States, because that way John can't break my heart by saying Seattle instead of Portland. John, why don't you start?
My dream vacation spot? Man,
outside of the U.S.
Outside of the U.S. I don't know. I think I'd like to go to Cornwall, England, where my grandmother's family was from.
Elinore, do you have a spot?
Pretty much gorgeous beaches in the tropics. None specifically come to mind because it could be Southeast Asia, Mexico, or Fiji. I've never been there, but I would love to go. But my favorite place is definitely the beach in the tropics. So gorgeous.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, and you said Fiji, like a spot that you haven't been that you want to go to.
I've never been to Fiji.
Yeah.
No.
Cool. Mine is Senegal, and it's just because I saw the Anthony Bourdain episode about that. And it just looked like a really cool place. I've never been to Africa before, except for like a tiny little bit of Egypt. So I would really like to visit that continent. And that just seems like a really cool country. I know it's a little cliche to pick a place based off of Anthony Bourdain, but there we have it. Cool. So ElfQuest. Elinore, why don't you tell us a little bit about the story, like what ElfQuest is all about?
The story is mostly centered around the Wolf Riders, who are a tribe of elves that have to leave their home due to humans and are tricked by trolls. And it starts a journey where they end up going and looking for others of their kind, and they end up finding more than they bargained for, let's say. Yeah, as an overarching story theme, ElfQuest is really about finding your home place and your belonging and who your tribe is, so to speak, and going on a journey to find out that maybe those that you thought were friends are actually foes and vice versa, and that people and relationships also change. There can be relationships that start out really great that end up souring. There are themes around life, death, family, struggling with war, but also being battle hungry, and really wanting to find where you belong.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of different editions and publications over the years. John, do you want to give us a rundown on which versions we read and some of what versions are out there?
So there's been a lot of reprints and a lot of recolorings, which is something that we talk about here a lot. But the very first issue of ElfQuest was published by Independent Publishers Syndicate out of Lansing, Michigan. So I always have to get that Michigan connection in there. The creators weren't super happy with the quality of that publication, so they decided to found their own comic book company to continue publishing after that. So Warp Graphics became a thing. I knew about Warp from other comics in my collection, but I didn't realize until we did this that it was founded specifically to publish ElfQuest, and also that Warp itself stands for Wendy and Richard Pini, so the two creators. So that's pretty interesting. It's also been published by like all of the majors. Marvel published ElfQuest after the initial run. The initial run was from 1978 to 1985, and then later in 85, Marvel picked it up for their Epic imprint, and they reprinted all of those stories and gave it a wider audience that got it on the newsstands and got more eyes on it. And then after that, it went back to Warp again for quite a long time, and they published a bunch of spin-offs and a bunch of continuations, and then DC had it for a while, and Dark Horse had it. So it's been published by everybody. Also, an interesting just a print thing that I thought was interesting was that when Marvel reprinted them for the Epic line, Marvel was printing 22-page comic books, but the original issues of ElfQuest were 32-page comic books. So they had to like reorder, and break the story in different places. And Wendy actually had to draw new pages to make everything like work correctly. And so in the backs of these collected editions, they have kind of those bridging pages that you can see. And I had a good time looking at like the extra art that they came up with and the extra dialogue to bridge it, because the original Warp Graphics series is 20 issues. That's the original quest. There's a 21st issue, but it's background stuff. It's not a story issue. And when Marvel reprinted those 20 issues, those became 32 issues because they stretched that material out. And I guess it's worth mentioning, since we haven't already, that most of this is available to read for free on their website. I thought it would be cool if we all read the same editions. So I bought the Father Tree editions, which was their name for their graphic album wing of Warp. But the ones on the website are the DC versions, the DC Archive editions. And I guess Wendy prefers the colors in those ones the best. It's been colored a bunch of times. But anyway, I love all that comparison of all the different stuff. And if you want to go in the other direction, Dark Horse has put out a phone book size edition that's just the black and white line art, and that's pretty great. I picked it up for $20. I think the cover price is $30, but that's a cool thing to have too. And so I'm kind of interested to look through that and compare that to the other editions. There's over 250 ElfQuest issues, which is pretty crazy. And that first issue came out in February 28th of 1978, and in 2018, 40 years to the day, the last issue of the final quest came out from Dark Horse. So that's a pretty huge creative legacy for this couple to have made. The arts, I really like the art in these first 10 issues that we read, and she ended up drawing a lot of the later stuff. There are other artists that worked on some of the spin-offs, but I believe that she did all of the kind of the core issues. But we'll see that as we go along. And then, of course, that things never really end, because after the final quest, they came back and did another 4-issue miniseries anyway, because they wanted to do more. So the last issue came out in 2020. I don't know if there will be more after that, but it's quite a legacy for an independent comic.
Sure. Yeah, that's something I want to touch on a little bit is that the independent side of that. This was, they started in 1978. So there was a tradition of underground comics that preceded this, but this was kind of the beginning of the boom of independent comics that has continued on to this day. They were just a little bit, as self-publishers, just a little bit behind Cerebus by Dave Sim in publishing. But so they were part of that initial wave there, coming into comic book stores, and that's what really enabled them to build a business here, is that comic book specialty shops had started to become a thing. We touched on this in The Death of Captain Marvel, how the rise of the direct market created new opportunities for doing comics outside of the newsstand, though, they did eventually, like you said, get onto newsstands through Marvel. Then one really key thing is that they started publishing collections, the trade paperbacks, really early on. They published their first collection through Dawning/Starblaze in January of 1981. That's the same month as the first Cerebus trade paperback, but that wasn't the first of the Cerebus phone books that would become famous later. Those came further down the line. The idea of publishing a story arc as a book and selling it, they were pretty much the first to be doing that. They weren't the first to ever publish trade paperbacks or collections or graphic novels, but what they did was really different in that they set out from the beginning to tell a story. So there'd been story arcs before, and there'd been finite stories before, but even miniseries weren't really a thing yet. But to do a long form finite story like that that was intended from the beginning to be that, even Cerebus wasn't intended to be finite from the beginning. That was a completely new concept. Like they said pretty early on, we're going to publish a collection every year with 5 or 6 issues of and it's going to be broken up into these story arcs and into these individual books. And now that's the standard especially for creator-owned comics. Sandman's that way. The Invisibles, Preacher, Saga, Gideon Falls, Walking Dead, like all these things that are now like the standard black and white or creator-owned comics. That's the format that they use, and this is really where that started. I hadn't realized that before I started putting together notes for this and a timeline and seeing that this was the date that they started doing this. So in a way, this is like the beginning of modern comics storytelling right here in ElfQuest.
I feel like I kind of need to start by sharing why I even care about ElfQuest. I'm not actually a huge comic nerd, quote unquote. But then when I go and I look at my collection of illustrated books, I do have actually quite a few comics when I recollect my time When I was like 12, 13, I was definitely hanging out at comic book stores, role-playing game stores. I was really into Dungeons and Dragons. I also grew up in Santa Cruz, California, which is a major redwood tree capital of the world. Grew up as an only child in the woods in Aptos, which is a small town that is just filled with forest and creeks and all sorts of things. And I think that's really where my love of ElfQuest stemmed from. It was a environment that I understood. It was an environment that I could relate to. I think I'm also a huge fan of fairy tales, Disney animation, and the art style with like the character proportions with the big eyes, big heads. That means that you can actually see the emotion of the characters like a lot more than I think, say, like Marvel House style, for example. And I think that creates like an easier connection with the characters and you can see their emotions.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about the art?
Yeah. So ElfQuest was introduced to me from a dear friend of mine when I was in junior high. I was also part of a D&D group. And so fantasy fairy tales, that was kind of my favorite stuff in life. And when I got my hands on those books, I distinctly remember reading them. And like when I got to the end, I needed the next one. I think about some of the incredible miniseries style of TV shows that we watch these days. All the HBO specials reminds me of like early Game of Thrones. There's a lot of like action. It feels very like you're watching like an animated movie. I ended up doing a lot of copying when I was younger, not tracing, but I would basically kind of learned a lot about drawing by looking at the pictures and drawing them. I created some of my own elves. I have old sketchbooks that are filled with like this drawing style. And so I really actually feel like my style now has been highly affected by Wendy Pini and the ElfQuest style. I remember when I was younger, going to a college class on drawing comics, and the teacher very much had like the Marvel style, and I was not interested. Like, I will never forget the way that the women's feet were drawn. They were always in that Barbie heel, and I wanted to be able to draw, action and not a Barbie heel, and like not those proportions. I like the ElfQuest proportions. Again, like I was saying, I loved animation. I loved Russian animation, anime. To this day, I feel like the ElfQuest style is more reminiscent. Oh my gosh, I can't think of the name right now, but
Miyazaki.
No, I was thinking of the Wizards and
Ralph Bakshi.
Thank you, Bakshi. Like totally. So I feel like the Bakshi like art style is probably closer, and I'm always looking for that. That's one of my favorite animation kind of styles, and you don't see that, especially these days, with so much CG, but I just really love that style. And then later when I did mentorships for concept art, and like everybody tells you big eyes, big heads, because that's how you connect with your audience with animation. So I'm really influenced by.
Yeah, I liked what you said about the emotive element of her work. And that was something I hadn't really thought about, but again, putting it into the context of 78, early 80s, so much comics back then, especially, it was like the characters have two emotions, angry and not angry. And that's like, that's it. That was something, John and I have talked about an essay that Alan Moore wrote mostly about Frank Miller, but also just kind of about the history and some of the most important and influential comics up to that point of the early 80s. And that was something that he pointed out, was the lack of emotion in character faces, the lack of expressiveness in the faces, that all the faces tended to look the same back then.
Yeah, like even now that I'm rereading in book 4 and thinking, how is she still coming up with these different distinct faces? Like all the quote unquote background characters, the extras, like all have completely distinct faces, body types. That was something that I was really into when I was being influenced by the style. I feel also, I don't know, as a woman, I appreciate that masculine and feminine roles go back and forth with the characters in ElfQuest. I remember I had a crush on Cutter, but I also wanted to be Cutter, like Lita was a badass, but she was also very feminine and sexy. I like that there are all of these themes around family and there's sex scenes and stuff, but it's not grotesque. It's very just I don't know, natural. And so I really appreciate that. And then the different dynamics of their relationships with the humans. There's a lot of relationship dynamics that I appreciate. It's, the characters it's a really character-driven story.
I guess the other thing on the art, and I really like it now, but part of why it took me so long to read. So I got these same editions, the Father Tree editions, at a garage sale the summer after my junior year of high school, and I never got around to reading them. And then a friend came over. This was a couple years after I graduated college. A friend saw them on my bookshelf and was like, "My God, ElfQuest!" And I was like, "You can have them." I still have never read them. He moved to the other side of the country, so I had to borrow Elinor's. I'm gonna buy some edition. I just haven't decided which edition. Maybe I'll end up with way too many ElfQuest comics. But the art style didn't it didn't speak to me, I guess, and I think that's fine. Not everything has to be for me. I'm kind of the demographic that everyone makes things for, so it's okay. But I think that's part of what is appealing to a lot of people is how different it is to everything else. I kind of like things to be kind of dark, I guess. And it has such a cute look to it. I know that's something that they've been fighting a long time. The guy who made Poison Elves, Drew Hayes, kind of specifically advertised Poison Elves as no cute elves and positioned it explicitly as the antithesis of ElfQuest. And he had later ended up becoming good friends with the Pinis and with Barry Blair, who worked there as well. But kind of as a counter to a Wizard article that had quoted Hayes about the cute elves, the Pinis bought a ad in Comics Buyer's Guide that was "These elves aren't cute" or something like that. And I guess that was kind of a sore point for them. But I mean, it is a way darker and more mature comic than, to me, it looked like. I mean, Cutter kills a human within the first couple pages, and the humans burn the forest where the elves live and force them out of their homes. It's very traumatic. It's also not a kid's comic. It definitely deals with some mature subject matter, and my understanding is it goes more and more later on into more mature territory. But so if I don't know, if you're like me and you've kind of bounced off this because the art makes it look like it is, I don't know, a Disney kids comic or something, you should still pick this up. It's really good.
It's interesting. I don't think of it, the style as cute at all. But I also really like adult full-length animation. And I recognize that is for a very slim audience. But that's also, I like illustrated books that aren't necessarily aimed at kids, but YA would count, technically. Hunger Games is YA. There's tons of death and violence and sexuality in those stories. They're just maybe quote unquote simplified ways of looking at dealing with the hero's journey and the issues that we all kind of deal with.
In the intro to the first collected edition, they talk about Joseph Campbell and telling mythological stories. And in between the first and second issues of ElfQuest, Star Wars came out. So this is a really fertile period of telling these kinds of stories and kind of trying to weave these into the culture.
I wanted to circle back to too is the characters and how, I mean, they're just cool, the Wolf Riders. They're just, again, kind of goes to the expectation versus reality of they're badass. They're just such cool characters. You want to be a Wolf Rider when you read this. It's a good use of comics as a medium in a lot of ways. Where about when they get to Sorrow's End in the first volume, and it's everything is aesthetically very different from anything the elves had seen before. And trying to do that in prose would have been really difficult to describe all the different buildings and the styles of everything without kind of completely breaking character and saying, well, this looks like Mesoamerican stuff. You could use that shorthand, then you would get it. But you don't want to do that in prose, but then you're trying to describe in detail what that means in prose would be very, very difficult. So doing it visually was really cool, but they also being able to have captions and little explanations of things in a way that you wouldn't really be able to do in animation or in a film, I think helps like build the richness of the world. So it's something that's just perfect for comics.
I'm still hoping that an ElfQuest movie will be made someday.
I can't believe it. Yeah.
Right? Because the story itself, and then it just is such a movie. And then the characters are so rich, and especially these days, like they can do anything. But it would be great, like, as many practical effects as possible, please. But I was also thinking
or animation. I mean, it seems like it should have been. I can't believe it hasn't been an animated movie yet. And I can only think that's like the Pennies are just being very particular about who they work with on that. Like they don't want to just sell the rights to anyone, because I can't imagine that people aren't banging down their door for those rights.
I think of the Lord of the Rings series and how that came out, and I'm like, they could totally do ElfQuest. Are you kidding? This is amazing. I would love to see that. And I was just thinking about how like that the original story was like set from beginning to end, and how well the story is written, as like it starts out in such a small chunk of the world. And as the story goes on, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's like we actually experience the story, like no spoilers, right? But we actually experience the story the way that Cutter does, where the whole world that we think first starts is just the Wolf Rider, right? Just trees and the Holt and Sending, and this is it. And then just Sorrow's End. So but then as they continue, you start thinking about like, well, where does the story end? And it doesn't seem like it does. So the world building isn't thrown to you right away. You get that the world gets to open up as you continue to like journey with them.
Yeah, that's a great.
I love that. Like by the time they're getting towards the end of, reaching the castle, towards the end of book 4, it's just such a different story than like the first 2 comics.
John and I have only still read the first 2 volumes, but even by the end of the second volume, like the amount that has been that the scope has been expanded is really interesting. Like you said, like the relationships with humans gets severely complicated in the second volume, where in the first one they're like, it just seems unambiguously like the humans are bad, like they're just bigoted, mean people. And there's a little bit of a hint, in that flashback about how Cutter's father died, about maybe it's not as simple as that, but then you start to get more of the human's perspective in volume 2.
And I feel like that opening of the world, it allows space for the reader, space for the audience, because then you can't help but think outside of what you're reading, because the world is so immense. You're like, oh my gosh, what other kind of tribes could there be and that we don't know about? And we don't even necessarily have to read about it. We get to be part of that story, because there is that possibility of imagination and imagining like all sorts of different tribes of elves and worlds.
Kind of another interesting parallel with Grendel, I feel like, where you've got, one creator telling the story, but then other creators get to kind of come in and do their take when they did the Grendel tales and all of that. So I'm flipping through the black and white edition, and the art is just so lush. And I think part of it's just that it's great art, but also it's like when we were looking at reprints of Warrior that were squeezed down into a smaller edition, it makes it feel like it has a lot of detail, because you're looking at a magazine size page compressed into a smaller page. The design of Cutter in particular reminds me of a cartoon that I watched as a kid, Pirates of Darkwater. Like he looks like the main character from that. And I don't know if there's any kind of influence there or anything, but yeah, I'm really enjoying this. It's good stuff.
Pirates of Darkwater is a name I haven't heard in a long, long time. I don't know that I ever watched that, but I do remember the name. Wow. That's a throwback. Yeah. You mentioned like the epic issues. So I've been trying to look. I've been looking at what I was reading. I was reading the Father Tree in print, and then I was like referencing also the black and white version on that's on Global Comics, and the color versions are on their website, and they're also available through the library system Hoopla. So I was looking at those, and then at scans of the Star Place editions and spotting some differences. Or there's a page where there's a little bit of a flashback about a little bit of Skywise's background and why he hates humans so much that's not in the black and white versions or in the Starblaze versions. I think that's introduced in Epic, and then it just becomes one of the regular pages from there on out. It's not in the back with the other Epic pages. It actually just became like a main page in the story. And then one of the pages in the issue where they are captured by the trolls, a couple of those pages are actually redrawn and with some of the dialogue redone. It just makes it a little bit more clear. It's not like censored or anything.
Well, and the idea that she's doing everything too, like she's kind of a one-woman army, like, she's doing the pencils and the inks. So, that just kind of reminds me of, other independent creators like Obar or, whomever who's doing the whole thing.
And she did the color in most editions, not in the Father Tree editions, but most of the other editions she did the color. Richard letters it, I think. But I think Wendy actually scripts it too. They write it together is the way she describes it, but I think the actual scripting is done by her as well. So and the original idea came from her. Like it is primarily her vision. I don't want to knock Richard or anything, but it's pretty clear. Like this is her vision primarily.
It is crazy to me rereading this as an adult now who's also like a professional illustrator and really getting the weight of how much art and how good it is. Like the compositions are so good just of the individual frames, but then there are also so many pages that are just laid out like so smart and beautiful, and just the way that the different transitions are. Like there are so many creative compositions. That's not good for radio, but just looking through some of these pages and the way that they're laid out, and I just don't see that very often.
One of the things that impressed me was like how fully formed she is as an artist right out the gate. This is like the first issue. Even looking at the black and white version, it's so solid, so mature. I guess she had done some stuff in fanzines before, but there's only a handful of artists that I can think of that really have that, who just come out the gate that strong. Jaime Hernandez is one of the others of Love and Rockets fame, where it just like the first issue of that, it's like, how is this these guys' first comic book? Like it's and ElfQuest is that way too, of just like, what, like how did you do this?
The style is so complete off the gate, and she's like, characters, no problem. Environments, no problem. And they're also like, they have such a specific character already. And like the costume design too, even like the costume, like everything is so designed, and it blows me away. The combination of the world building plus just the skill of the drawing.
It's cool. Like each of the different like elf cultures is so visually distinct as a culture, the same way different human cultures are. And that's the sort of thing I think a lesser creator would have just assumed, like, okay, even though they all got separated at some point in the past, they would all still just have the same aesthetics. They would all have the same ideas, and I don't know, like they would all just be the same, even though they're all scattered out or whatever. But she and Richard had the good sense to think like, no, humans all came from the same place originally, and look how varied we are. Even within the same city, like there can be a dozen accents, and why wouldn't it be the same case with the elves?
Exactly. And who doesn't love characters with animal companions?
Yeah, like I said, the Wolf Riders are. I think all three of us on this call are cat people, but I love the relationship between the elves and the wolves, and their whole thing, I guess.
It's funny, as an aside. So when I was younger and I was drawing from the book and inspired from the book and everything, I created a tribe of elves, and they were cat riders, and they lived in the desert. So that was the tribal, like the desert elves, and they rode on lynx cats.
Lynx are a good choice for like a cool, visually distinct cat. John, you have anything else you wanted to get into on this?
No, I think we covered it all. But I mean, I'm happy to see the world expand and get into more issues of this. The first 10 issues, there is some unfolding of the world and the mythology, but also it's just kind of the story about a boy that's obsessed with a girl. And I'm sure that we go further than that, as we go further into the issues.
It gets so good. I'm just excited for you guys to like read the next one. Like it's like we're just getting started. I feel like book 3 is maybe my favorite book. Book 4 is like one long battle.
Yeah, well,
It's
we'll have to
fun.
do another episode for the next 2 books from the core original quest. Who's everyone's favorite elf so far?
Oh, I got to go with Cutter for sure. He's the most developed, but I mean, I like a lot of the other ones too. And I do think it's a good observation that they're all like visually distinct. Like it is interesting to look through here, and like even just looking at the covers and stuff, like they're all very different character designs. But yeah, I like Cutter the best.
I mean, same. I've been a Cutter girl since the beginning. Like I said, totally had a crush on Cutter, but also wanted to be Cutter,
Yeah, I thought we might have some votes for Skywise, but I would have to go with Cutter too. With I'm forgetting her name, his daughter, as a close second. And even though we don't get to see that much of her in the second volume,
Ember,
yeah. And I know that she becomes bigger later on because I've seen some of the covers of some of the future books.
It's fun to see the little kids grow up, like that she actually does such a good job of creating characters that shift as they get older, both visually and then their character stories as well. I'd say I have a weird like soft place in my heart for Nightfall. I really like her design. I like the struggles that she goes through. I feel like she's a very strong female character, while also like she doesn't have to be masculine to be strong. I really like her, and I like the story of Redlance, and I like what ends up happening too with their story.
Well, I look forward to finding out about that. Yeah, the gender stuff is really interesting because there are, especially when they go to the to Sorrow's End, there's like more of a, they discover there that there's more gender differences there than there were in the tribe in the Holt. So that's just like another cultural difference. All right, well, we will be back for another ElfQuest episode as John and I get into the second 2 volumes. We might also between now and then finally do Ronin. Maybe we won't. You never know. But yeah, tune in next time to see what happens.
Are you?
And then, oh, look at this new kitty. I know. He's going to have to cut that out now.